Right, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. Recording is now enabled, as you can probably see on your various devices, I hope. Our theme for today, as you may know, is I'm going to spend a little while just talking about the European Resolver policy, which some of you have contributed to the drafting of. So thank you for your input thus far, those of you that have. I'm going to talk a bit about that, and then no doubt that will lead to a discussion. And then we'll see what else is on people's minds, if there are any other topics that people want to raise. If you've got any questions as we go through, then use the Zoom functionality to raise your virtual hand if you're able to. Alternately, if you're able to use the chat, feel free to indicate in there either you want to ask a question, or indeed, if you can't talk, if you're in an environment where that will be hard, please just sort of type the question in the chat and I'll pick that up at the appropriate time. So without further ado, let's start by looking at the European Resolver policy. So let me firstly share my screen. It would help if I can see the right one. Hang on a moment. See what's happened. Right. Cunningly, Zoom has changed the content of the screen for me, so I'll just change back. Right, so let me try again to share my screen, which I hope you can now see in front of you. Since no one's shouting otherwise, I'll assume that that is indeed the case. Right, so I'm just going to sort of give a little bit of background to the Resolver policy for you, given that not everyone will be familiar with it. Then talk through some of the key components of it. I'm not going to literally read it word for word because that will be really tedious and take a long time. So I'm just going to call out some of the highlights as I see them, to talk about the sort of the methods to adopt the policy, and then open up for questions once we get to that point. All right, so let's see. Yeah. Right. So by way of background to this, as I sort of hinted at, it's the policy as it stands has been developed with input from across the industry, including with contributions from some of the people on this call, partly in recognition that most people don't understand DNS. In fact, most people don't even know such a thing exists. And also partly in recognition that concerns have been raised a number of times in a number of different fora, that somehow users are being tracked and their DNS data is being monetized by some unspecified resolver operators. So the intent behind the policy is to give reassurance to both sort of users and other stakeholders that any personal data that resolver operators gain during the operation of their sort of DNS services isn't being monetized, nor indeed is it being used for any purposes other than those for which it's intended, unless of course there's a requirement to do so through law or regulation, or as it says on the slide, with the GDPR level consent of the users, and providing it's clearly documented in the resolver operator's transparency and privacy statement. So in other words, it's documented and people can find out about it in plain English. Now, having looked at a number of the existing resolver policies that are out there, of which there are a fair number, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, some of them, certainly not all, but a number are written very much from a US market perspective. Some of them don't make explicit references to the applicable legislation and regulations that they're operating under. They may have requirements which will be problematic given sort of local regulations and legislation. And of course, there have been concerns about certainly applications in particular acting as gatekeepers and determining policy, and sometimes an unintended sort of consequence of determining policy, that leading to the increased potential for centralization, which I think many of us will accept is in general a bad thing. And then also from an end user's point of view, if every application has its own resolver policy, then potentially over time there's going to be an awful lot of inconsistency. It's going to be hard to find and understand them all, and that's not going to be helpful to end users who realistically aren't going to read through all of the resolver policies of all of the applications on their devices. Right. So that's what led to the European resolver policy being developed. I'm just going to sort of call out some of the key components within it. This is, as I said earlier, this is not exhaustive, but we'll just give you a flavour for some of the requirements within the policy. So with the caveat, as it says on this slide, except where required or prohibited by law or with GDPR level consent of end users, operators of resolver policies must, in the first instance, make, document and publish their operational practices to protect the privacy and security of their users' data. I think is a reasonable aspiration. And in particular, you'll see we refer to section 5 of the IETF's RFC 8932. And the practices documented within that should be adopted for this purpose. Those of you with a good memory will recall that Sarah Dickinson took us through RFC 8932 a few months back, and if anyone's interested, I'll be happy to post a link to the recording of that call for you to have a look at after this, if that's useful. Secondly, resolver operators should not retain or transfer to any third party any personal data that they gain from the operation of those services, except where it's anonymized or aggregated for use in activities such as cybersecurity, DNS analytics, reporting and research purposes. But other than that, they shouldn't be sharing or indeed retaining long-term that data. They certainly shouldn't monetize either directly or indirectly the data, or transfer it to third parties for them to monetize instead. And they should not either use or require HTTP cookies or any other tracking techniques. Again, to make it up, but that's partly to kill the myth of users being tracked all over the internet through their DNS activity. Moving on to the sort of next main component of the policy, which talks about security and filtering requirements. So key components there on blocking, sort of details of what categories of content are being blocked should be included in the transparency and privacy document. Again, this is with the caveat of except where it's prohibited by legislation or regulation. Filtering should be possible to opt in and out of. And for cyber intelligence, aggregated material should be shared. That's very much on the basis that improving cyber intelligence is in the long-term interests of everyone. So sharing that is to be encouraged. And then an important point which I put in sort of red text, if you're looking at the slide, is that care should be taken in offering sort of resolver services that don't have either malicious content protection or don't block child sexual abuse material. If it's offered as a default option to non-expert end users, consumers being the obvious example of that. Again, with the caveat, unless it's unlawful to provide those protections. And that's driven in part by noting that a number of resolvers do offer a variety of different options, some of which include things like malicious content blocking. They also offer completely unfiltered variants, and there's not an issue with that, but those aren't really suited to the mass market. I would argue. I appreciate that not everyone would necessarily agree with that perspective, but given that a lot of end users don't know that DNS exists, providing a service to them that doesn't have such basics as blocking malicious content would seem like a bad thing to do, whereas for expert users, clearly they know what they're doing. That's a different matter entirely. And then moving to the sort of third main component of the policy, which is around transparency. There should be a transparency and privacy notice. And I should say this may be a discrete sort of standalone thing, or if it's an entity that operates a range of other services beyond DNS, they may well have existing policy. So this may be an addition to the content of that document. Important things though, such a document should be readily accessible to users. No point having it if they can't find it. It should be written in plain language and it should be up to date. It should be clear on compliance with both EU and national legislation. It should give details of what, if any, personal data is stored or processed by the resolver operator. It should contain details of any data requests from law enforcement agencies, both the origination of those requests, so which agencies, and what, if any, action has been taken. Important caveat on that one, which applies to many of these things, is unless it's not lawful to do so. And then finally, there should be a complaints procedure documented for any issues arising from the filtering. Conscious that there are plenty of instances of false positives in terms of wrong categorization of content, so there should be an easy method for that to be rectified, that's clearly documented in the transparency and privacy notice. Then just considering a couple of obvious questions relating to the policy, details of which you can see available on the website, which has the imaginative URL of europeanresolverpolicy.com. Firstly, it's not DNS protocol specific, so it's just as applicable to sort of plain unfiltered, encrypted DNS, but as it is to all current variants of encrypted DNS, including but not limited to .do and .doc. It's largely suited to resolver operators, be they sort of standalone resolver operators, ISPs, or others. So if from the point of view of adoption of the policy, but there's certainly no restriction on other organizations that have an interest in this area in endorsing the policy, and I've given some examples on the slide there. In terms of how to do that, pretty straightforward. It's just to have a look at the policy, confirm that you're compliant with it, and then I'll make sure that the website is updated to include the details of the organisation on it. And probably lastly, but I guess pretty importantly, there is no charge to use it, or indeed to have an organisation listed as either adopting it or endorsing it. Which segues neatly into, we are planning some activity towards the end of this month to promote the first sort of tranche of organisations that have either endorsed and or adopted the policy. So if you want to be included in that first tranche, please get in touch as soon as possible. I should say, so given that's relatively short timescales, for those companies that wish to be listed as adopting the policy but haven't necessarily got everything in place by the end of the month, that's not a problem, but there will need to be a very firm commitment that all your sort of policies and documentation will be fully compliant within a reasonable and short time frame after the end of the month to be included. And I know there's some existing press interest in getting that first list of organisations, so there should be some positive PR benefit from those organisations that are included, either endorsing or adopting the policy. And I think that is pretty much it. So with that in mind, let me come off the screen share back onto my main screen. So hopefully that was useful, if a quick run through, very much just to give you a flavour of what's what the background behind the policy, what some of the key components are, and I'm sure that will lead to some questions. I've got a couple of rhetorical ones I can throw in if needed, but does anyone have any questions? And as a reminder, you can use Zoom to raise your virtual hand, or put something in the chat if that is easier. So I'll give you a moment to give that some thought and tell me what questions you may have. Maybe while you're thinking, I will throw mine then. This is a starter for 10, which was raised sort of earlier, which was very much, given that it's titled European Resolver Policy, whether there's any restriction on sort of the geographic market or markets where it can be applied. And the straight answer to that is no. That's absolutely not an issue. Because I know there's some organisations that are thinking of applying it to their activities globally. That's completely fine. If you want to do that, it's obviously written specifically with sort of the European marketplace in mind, particularly with reference to things like GDPR. But it's not a problem to apply it in other markets if that's appropriate to you. I only mentioned that because that's come up previously, so I thought it was worth throwing in. So does anyone else have any questions? I can see John has raised his virtual hand, so do you want to come in, John?
I guess it is not so much a question, but kind of a thank you for putting this together. It's I know that it's quite an investment of your time to get something like this done, and I think that it's a policy that's its time is appropriate. So thank you very much for your work and putting something like this together.
Thank you. Thank you. That's much appreciated. I should at that point hastily emphasize that many others have contributed their input. I've been holding the pen, but wouldn't claim the credit for all of the intellectual content, importantly. Yeah, I can see Peter, you've raised your virtual hand as well.
I've managed to clap as well, sorry. Yeah, this isn't really much to do with the policy itself, but I was curious about the history and how this document came about.
Okay, yeah, it was literally partly prompted by a number of references in a number of different conferences that resolver operators in general, I think specifically ISPs, if I recall, this is over a year ago now, were doing bad things with DNS data, which seemed a bit odd given that certainly in the European marketplace, as you all know well, GDPR would frown on that sort of activity. So it was partly driven by that and partly driven by, again, if you cast your mind back 12 months or so, you would have had the Mozilla TRR, for example, out there, which at the time had a number of clauses in it which you just could not enact in Europe, at least certainly not in some European markets. For example, I think there was a requirement to list the URL of every site that you blocked if you had a block list, which I know in some markets, and so I've got obviously deeper knowledge of the UK market than others, if you publish a list of the URLs of all the child sex abuse sites that you blocked, you would be sent to prison. So there wasn't a rush of enthusiasm of companies keen to comply with the TRR policy as it existed then. I think, to be fair, that has been modified since, but citing that just as an example. But I think that sort of just sparked the thought process that maybe therefore something that was fit for purpose for the European market was needed, hence sort of triggering the development of what we now have, which has gone through a number of iterations in the intervening period. So that was, yeah, effectively the genesis of it, whenever that was, I think about 12 months ago now, if I recall.
That was my follow-up question, is how long have you been working on it? Thanks.
Yeah, not continuously, I hasten to add, for 12 months, but
as John said, I think it's a really good initiative. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other comments or questions from others would be most welcome. Good chance to think. And if not, can I commend you to have a look at the website, which, as I say, is EuropeanResolverPolicy.com, which I'll put in the chat. Which contains the content of the policy, as you would expect. So you can find it there. And download it if that's useful. So please have a look on the site. Please do that. That'd be much appreciated. And if that then triggers any questions, do jump in. And I can see in the meantime, I think Ulrich and Jim have both raised their virtual hands. So Ulrich first.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, have you taken part of the KIN DNS workshop from ICANN? Because I think that would be something that actually matches what they maybe want to do, and let's say it would be good to mention your initiative, and you have already put in all the work, so I mean it would be good that others can follow your lead.
Okay, I was certainly on one of the sessions at ICANN a couple of weeks back, but it wasn't that one. So what was that called again, Rick?
It's KIN DNS or kind DNS, but only one D in the middle. So and what they want to do is something like manners, but for DNS. And so so good rules for DNS, and this what you have done sounds like good rules for resolvers. So
fine. Okay, in that case, I will look that up afterwards and reach out to them. Thank you for that. I'd not heard of that one before. That's good to know about, Ulrich. Thank you. Jim.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got a couple of points I'd like to raise. First thing is, you mentioned today, and also when you announced this to a couple of mail lists a few days ago, we. Could you please define who you mean by we? As we developed this document, we published this document. Where does this stand?
You're a little quiet, Jim. Could you say that again?
You've said many times today and in the past about this document, Andrew, you've used the word we. Who is we in this context? Is this an industry consortium? Is this an ad hoc group of people that put this document together? Who's behind this? And that's another concern that's been raised to me. Many people have asked me, what's this EuropeanPolicy.org website all about? Who's behind it?
Right, so the we in the context that I used it earlier was very much an ad hoc group of people that have sort of contributed their sort of intellectual input to what needs to be in the document. As I say, some of whom are indeed on this call, but I will leave them to, should they wish to say so. That's entirely up to them, as I think they were doing it in the personal rather than formal organisational capacity. Yeah, very much an informal grouping to produce the document. There isn't a formal organisation per se behind it, nor indeed do I think there needs to be.
Well, that was what the follow-up question is. I think it might be helpful to put that information on the website, Andrew, because people will be asking, where's this document? What's this document's provenance? Who's behind it? You know, is this a front for Mozilla? For argument's sake, I'm talking hypothetically here. It's not clear who's behind that document. And the follow-up question about that is your intention to try and socialise that and have it developed in some way, say if it's published, say, as a right document, or an ITF RFC, or a publication from the centre, or is it just going to stand as it is at the moment? Or are you going to try and get it endorsed, loosely endorsed, by some other organisation or trade group?
So at the moment, the plan is more the latter, to sort of look to other bodies to endorse the document, but I'm open to suggestions from people, yourself included. If you think there's a better route than that, happy to hear it. But the current plan is to, if you like, leave it as a freestanding thing that people can adopt and endorse as appropriate. But alternate ideas will be most welcome.
Sure, but this is the thing, if it's just been stuck on a website somewhere, how is that going to get traction with major ISPs and content providers and anybody else if they don't know to go look for it? Is there any attempt to, say, for example, contact, for example, the UK ISPA and ask ISPA to socialise that around the membership? Could we do something similar with other organisations or other entities like that, particularly in Europe, but not just in Europe? I think the message has to be got out, and also it'd be very helpful if we saw one or two ISPs, particularly the bigger eyeball networks, say we endorse this document, we put it into effect.
Yeah, I think we agree with both of those. In fact, I have already socialised it with UK ISPA specifically to the sort of policy representatives of the ISPA members. And various activities underway to socialise it with other membership groups, but including the sort of DNS working group, for example, of RIPE. But again, if anybody has any bright ideas as to other groupings to share it with, feel free to let me know. Okay, thanks, Jim. I can see Vittorio has raised his hand next. So do you want to jump in, Vittorio?
Yes, well, I just wanted to say that I was actually one of the people that have contributed to this, because I mean, you showed it to me and I provided feedback, and I guess that the list will be mostly composed of the companies that will support this from the beginning. I mean, even if we don't have a very big resolver, we just have a small experimental DOH resolver run by the Power DNS team. We think it was a good idea to have a. I mean, it's a good idea to have a common standard, since there were other proposals for, I mean, trusted resolver standards, and I think it would be better to have something which is more suitable to the European environment, and just to discuss it with anyone else who would like to maybe come up to a broadly shared policy. So, I mean, I don't think there's any problem to share names or put names on the website if I agree that there could be some transparency. Actually, I saw this as the continuation of the work that we did with RC 8932, in which I was also involved. So I think it was just natural. If I don't know if everyone is aware of what was RC 8932. Actually, up to the last minute in the draft, there was something which was pretty similar to this. There was a suggestion as a best practice that resolver operators disclose their jurisdiction and their policies for data treatment. And at the very last minute, I remember that the then ITF chair saying that, which sense, it made sense that this was more like a policy statement. So that was actually taken out of the draft before it became an RFC, if I remember well. And so at the same time, we thought it would make sense to have that kind of standardized best practice in terms of policy disclosures of what people do with data when they run a resolver. And so this, I guess, is where it ended up.
Yeah, and that's a good point. In terms of the challenge with putting it in as an internet draft, of course, that it clearly is policy, which would be problematic, I guess, for an IETF document specifically. But yeah, that's useful background, Vittorio. Thank you. Okay, Brett, you've raised your hand next.
Yeah, really, I just wanted to add some weight to what Jim was saying, and also to kind of agree with what you just said about it not really fitting to be an IETF document. But I do think it would benefit from having the weight of something like a RIPE DNS working group document behind it, and or involvement with the kind DNS project that Ulrich mentioned. I think getting the weight of some of those well-known organizations behind it would add a lot of weight and mean a lot more people were interested in deploying it.
Yeah, noted. I think it's a fair point. Yeah, thank you. Len, you raised your hand next, I think.
Yeah, so let me ask this question. So, I mean, good work. So thumbs up on that. And I think it's, as other people said, it's something needed. Now let me ask the difficult question. So we do things like this because there is change that is needed. We do them so that they bring about change and help change happen. So given that context, what do you sort of envision the sort of maybe first round of impacts that we sort of need to look at would be from this? Because it seems to be more than just a reflection upon the DNS operators. There could be potentially things that play into my favorite topic, of course, which is discovery of resolvers. How do you see that sort of playing out, and what are the areas we need to pay attention to? See, that's a nice, easy question for a Monday afternoon in the UK, right? I hear you. At least I hear you can start drinking again outside. The rumor has it so.
Yes, which is important, and as you can clearly see, get our haircuts as well, which is marvelous. To be honest, we're over half an hour in and no one's mentioned haircuts, so since we routinely refer to that on the weekly calls, it was about time. Anyway, so in terms of the effects, unless I'm missing something, I don't see how this directly plays to matters like discovery. It'd be tempting to say that perhaps there should be a requirement in discovery that only resolver operators that were compliant with the policy should be discoverable. But I think that might be a challenge to get through the ADD working group. So I can't see us going anywhere like that just yet. It would be good It would be good, though, genuinely, if there were more adoption, purely just to give reassurance to users that their data isn't being monetized. Beyond that, I'm struggling to think of any other obvious effects, but I'll happy take input from others if they think there are some. Or for that matter, Glenn, did you have anything in particular in mind that you think should be sort of being targeted for this?
The only thing that comes to mind initially would be if there is a standard way that we need to carry this information across so that it can be presented to the user, not as a text format, but as part of the discovery protocol. Do we need ultimately to have a URL that points people, at least for your first resolver, to what the resolver's policy document is, so that the humans can go read it if they want it?
Yes, which I know that has indeed come up, I think, in some of the discovery discussions. I think it's fair to say there have been mixed views as to whether even conveying of client or machine or human readable content is acceptable. But certainly, yeah, if it were possible to link through discovery to that transparency and privacy document, that will be a good thing. So yeah, I'll certainly bear that in mind as a point well made.
I mean, it could even be something as simple as it wouldn't really require the ITF to be involved, but something as simple as a well-known URL that adopters could publish at to so that you could go to dnspolicy.foo.com and get foo.com's resolver policy, ideas like that. So anyways,
Glenn, wasn't there a proposal for that specifically, a policy proposal? There was someone submitted a draft for that, for incorporating policy into machine readable statements. And I'm sorry, I don't remember any other details other than that, but I remember it's crossing my screen and making my eyes water.
I'd have to go back and look. You thinking one of the ADD proposals maybe had something like that in it?
I'm not sure if it was ADD or if it was elsewhere.
Okay, I mean, there's been so many of late in the last year or two, and sometimes I'll admit it, when we get into the policy stuff, my brain just goes out of scope and stops looking. Keeps me out of trouble.
Yes.
To actually reference, to come back to the answers to some of the questions about what is it we do with this, I think that there are two obvious things that this policy will do, and probably a lot of others. But one is that it will make people who currently have a policy that, or have a behavior set that falls outside of the policy, it might make them reconsider that. Whether they do or don't, of course, is a business decision that those providers or those operators would have to choose, and that's that's out of scope for the conversation. But what I think is more interesting is that this will hopefully encourage behavior in the future, meaning if someone's looking to do something that is outside of the policy scope, it would allow the technical staff or even the policy or product staff to point at the document and say, no, we shouldn't do that because this document, which everyone agrees is a good thing, says that we shouldn't do it. So just as much as changing behaviors today, I think that it's also useful for how it will prevent behaviors in the future. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Thanks, John, and thanks for your input previously as well. Just echoing your comment on the chat, so thank you. Chris, I think, is next in terms of. Oh no, actually.
No.
So Jim, even, sorry, is listed different order on my different parts of my screen. Jim, apologies.
Just a very quick one to build on what John just said. Maybe it might be better to give this document another name, because calling it a European resolver policy is effectively saying to the rest of the world, this is not for you. So it may be better to have talking about European from the document's title, because potentially this policy could be picked up and used by ISPs in other parts of the world that are outside, for example, the European Union or continental Europe. It could be used in enterprises, for instance, or it could be used by Quad 9, for instance. Not I'm going to put words in John's mouth, but
We are a European organization, Jim, so this does apply to us.
yeah, but you've got a global footprint, John. Yeah,
Sure.
but still.
Yeah. I think the sort of pros and cons with that, Jim, but yes, I do take your point. So hence my comments earlier about that. Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I was also going to respond to what John said about this guiding behavior in the future, which leads me to think about, well, what are the boundaries of the policy? You know, where is the line drawn? Now, in there, one of the reasons given that it says that you are allowed to share aggregated data with third parties if it's for a set of reasons. One of those reasons is DNS analytics. It's not actually defined as far as I can tell. What do you understand by that term?
That was mainly driven by, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact context where this came, or rather by whom, but I think it was driven by the need for resolver operators to be able to share sort of generic details of some of the behaviors that they were seeing in their traffic, but by aggregating it, you know, by definition, that completely takes out the personal data from the equation. So it then becomes safe to share. And frankly, I can't think of any reason why you couldn't or shouldn't share aggregated data anyway. So it's partly around the sort of to allow general behavioral type information to be shared with third parties should a resolver operator wish to. Again, others feel free to jump in if you, because that
Sure.
point
This is John again. I think I understand your concern, Chris, that it's DNS analytics is a relatively open-ended term. I think there are other terms in the document, though, that restrict the concept of personal data being used for that. But as an example, if you wanted to give a talk at RIPE or at ICANN or NANOG about what your resolver or your authoritative server does, there kind of needs to be an exclusion in there that allows those kind of data to be shared publicly. Otherwise, you know, a strict reading of this would say, well, you can't share anything with anybody except for these certain purposes. But I do take your point. DNS analytics is possibly a broad term. I don't know how to square that. Like, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, like, okay, maybe there is some way that this could be read, which is a much broader interpretation of it, which would allow things. But then if you look at the rest of the document, things like commercial purposes or productizing it, and also the use of personal data is specifically forbidden. So I think that bounds it appropriately. Are you contemplating some way that it doesn't or couldn't?
No, it was just a vague feeling that yes, it was an area that possibly could be exploited as a loophole, but I think you're right. Yeah, the other parts of it constrain it sufficiently.
Yeah, I think the key thing there is because it has to be aggregated, that it takes out the risk that you can't of you be able to share any personal data. Because if you look at the sort of definition of personal, it definitely is not aggregated. Because if you can get at the personal data, then it automatically becomes personal data, not aggregated or anonymized. Yeah, as John said, yeah, it lets you talk at top level about what traffic levels you're seeing, etc., what the main traffic flows are, but you can't say what data Chris Box, what sites Chris Box has been going to. You could never get to anything remotely meaningful that way.
No.
But yeah, and equally, I should say to anybody else, if anyone has any feedback on any errors or omissions, please continue to feed those in, given this has been written by input from a range of people. As recently as this week, I've been talking to someone about a few additions that we need to make. So please feed that in if there is anything that you feel needs to be improved.
Perhaps just while I'm still in the queue, I don't know if there's. I haven't searched whether there's any change process in the policy itself, because I guess once a set of organizations have adopted it, they're only adopting a particular version that's current at the time. And it's, yeah, how do you manage that?
Yeah, which obviously isn't a problem we've had yet, to be fair. Going forward, if you look on the website, you'll see that the current version is dated. If we go for any sort of uplifts, then we'll track that by date, and equally the adoption version will be by date for the avoidance of doubt.
So does that mean people need to re-adopt it? You know, so do they say, okay, I've signed up for version 1, version 2 comes out, or version whatever the date is there then a round of people saying yes or no to that?
If we get to any material changes, I think most of the things to date, to be fair, haven't been substantive changes. I mean, they've been more clarifications than anything else. So we haven't got to the point yet, Chris, where there's any change that I would view as material, to be honest. No. Going forward, though, yes, we'll have to then look at a way of either giving a sort of a period of time to allow people to confirm that they're now compliant with version 2, let's call it, or look at an alternate way of doing that. I think Hugh has, I think Hugh in the chat, I think is basically agreeing with the point that you've made. I'll give that some thought as to how we can do that in a clear and importantly transparent manner. Okay, anyone else got any questions or observations that they would like to come in on? I've mentioned that Chris has just made that comment, and as a no, in which case let's move on from there. So thank you for comments and questions there. That's much appreciated. And as I said earlier, if anyone wants to talk about your individual organizations either endorsing or adopting the policy, feel free to get in touch with me directly to have a separate conversation about that. I'd be very happy to set something up. Right, so we're moving on now to any other business. So is there anything that anyone wants to raise on the call this week? Give you a chance to think about that. I should say, if you didn't see it in the weekly press updates, two things I'll highlight. One is, as I can see Lars in front of me on my screen at least, that there's a Spanish version of the DOE discussion paper that ECHO put out a few months back. So that's now available in Spanish, which will be of interest to some people. The other thing which I thought was quite helpful, which I put the wrong link to last week, so I'll put it again this week. On the APNIC site, Jeff Huston put a useful roundup of DNS related discussions that occurred at IETF 110 a few weeks ago. So worth looking at that if you haven't had a chance to do so. Right, last chance for anyone to raise anything else before we finish the call today. If not, just one last thing from me, which is I'll send out a confirmatory email later on this week, but we should be having a discussion next Monday on DOE versus DOC. The would-be presenter will be confirming that to me in the next day or so. As soon as they confirm, I'll send out an email to let you all know, but it will be sort of talking about the relative merits of DOE versus DOC, which I think will be quite timely, because there does seem to be quite a lot of interest in that subject area at the moment. And with that in mind, then, thanks everyone for your time. Have a great week, and speak to you again same time next week. Thanks all.
Thanks, Andre. Bye.
It's Andrew.
Cheers.